Welcome to this webinar, Your Guide to Talking Therapies National Staff Bank, brought to you by SBK Healthcare. To find out more about further educational webinars, courses and conferences, please do visit our website www.talkingtherapies-nnf.co.uk.
So, as Vanessa has said, today we're going to be talking through our guide to the NHS Talking Therapies National Staff Bank. And ahead of schedule, I'll apologise for my enthusiasm. It's something that we've been working on for about 2 and a bit years now, and are extremely excited that we're able to kind of bring this to you and start to kind of see our kind of plans becoming a reality. So if we can go on to the first slide. Thank you. So we're going to talk first of all a little bit about where this came from. So as some of you who will have potentially kind of seen me talk at other events or have met me kind of in various different situations will be aware of the fact that I've worked in what was IAPT, NHS Talking Therapies, since it first started over 15 years ago. And throughout the time, we've experienced, as lots of different NHS kind of workforces have, a real challenge with our workforce across the board from both high intensity therapists. And when we talk about high intensity therapists, we're talking about all of the different modalities that sit within that, our PWPs, psychological wellbeing practitioners, and for various different reasons. So when I first joined the national team and I started to work with all of the regions across the country, it was very much clear that what I'd been experiencing in practice was what was being experienced in all of the other regions. And everybody kind of came together and started to think about, right, what are the challenges that we're experiencing? And are there ways in which we can all work as one to try and overcome these? And then as a result of that, we started to think about a national bank. And a bank that mirrors the sorts of banks that we see NHS professionals offering with our nursing staff, with our administrative staff, but that didn't exist with our psychological therapy staff. And managed to, through various different means, hunt down Sam and Claire and the team, and kind of work with them over the last couple of years to produce what we're going to go through today. So just to kind of give a bit of a background, and we've looked at the data in our workforces across the course of time, but the most current data that we have is our 2023 workforce census. So this is something that all services complete on an annual basis. And we as a national team are then able to see what the workforce looks like, how the workforce is growing or not growing, dependent on the areas, and what some of the challenges are. So within our 2023 workforce, we had around about 6,400 high intensity therapists. And as I say, when I talk about high intensity therapists, I'm talking about all of the different modalities, not just CBT. And we had, as I say, about 6,400. What we do know is that, as people will be aware of, through the autumn statement, there's some incredible expansion that is going to take place with our workforce. And we know that that workforce from high intensity therapists needs to grow by about another 2,466 over the next 5 years. So there is a big growth that we need to kind of make in that period of time. And we already know that we're struggling with our workforce being the size that it needs to be. From a PWP perspective, similarly, in 2023, the workforce census showed that we had approximately 4,400 PWPs in our workforce. But again, with that increased investment through the autumn statement, we know that that workforce needs to grow further over the next 5 years by approximately 800 PWPs. So on top of the shortfalls that we already have in the workforce and will potentially have more of as we move towards expanding the workforce with our autumn statement, there were also somewhere in the region of 600 whole-time equivalent high-intensity vacancies. And when we strip that back and we look at what a high-intensity therapist would clinically provide in a given week, that equates to about 12,400 clinical hours that are being lost every week just based on our current vacancies. So it's huge amounts. And when we look at that from a PWP perspective, there were approximately 836 PWP vacancies. And again, when we think about what a whole-time equivalent PWP would provide in clinical hours, that equates to about 15,000 clinical hours per week that are being lost because of the vacancies that we have. And that obviously is spread across the country, and some areas struggle more than others. But when we look at those sorts of figures, you can see kind of the challenges that we are all experiencing when it comes to workforce. On top of that, there are also, as there are in any workforce, sickness absences. And our rates within talking therapy services are actually a lot lower than in other areas of the NHS, which is fantastic. But we do still have sickness absences, and that equated in 22-23 to about 4.6% for high intensity therapists and about 3.5% for PWPs. Naturally, people will leave services and kind of move into other roles, either within other NHS talking therapies environments or outside of those. And the turnover rate that we saw in 2023 was about 15% for high intensity therapists. So we lost approximately 860 whole time equivalents. And for PWPs, it was about 27%. And that equates to about 1,061 PWPs. And that's individuals that are kind of moving, as I say, from one service to another or potentially out of services altogether. When we strip that back and we look at, okay, of those leavers, how many individuals actually left NHS talking therapy services altogether and moved into non-NHS commissioned services? And it was quite high. So in 2023, approximately 223 PWPs left the workforce completely and 163 high intensity therapists. We've also got, naturally, as with any workforce, people retiring. So 1% of our PWPs retired in 2023 and 5% of our high intensity therapists. And one of the other things that we were able to look at in our workforce census in 22-23 was our agency and outsourcing use. So in practice, I'm aware of the fact that kind of certainly in the services that I've worked in, we found it quite hard to often find agency staff and agency staff potentially that were appropriate. So we would occasionally have agency staff, but what we tended to do was outsource a lot of our activity. So when we were really struggling with vacancies or waiting lists, we would look at what are the external options to our service that we can potentially consider that will enable us to get this clinical kind of these clinical hours, but not through the staff that we have working substantively for us. And we haven't been able to get kind of the level of detail of outsourced use in the current census, but it is certainly something that we're looking at kind of what's the word? Improving on in future census iterations. But we do know that there were approximately 335 whole-time equivalent agency staff, which was about a 10% increase in the course of a year, so from one census to another. And obviously, kind of as our workforce challenges continue, the likelihood is our use of agency and outsourcing is going to also increase in number. Next slide, please. So I'm going to pass you across to my colleague, Sam, who's going to talk through the solution design. Go for it, Sam.
Thank you, Hayley. And I'll just start by saying your enthusiasm has been integral in driving this forward, so please don't ever apologise for it. So after being borderline stalked by Hayley, I think it's fair to say, we were naturally really interested in the prospect of building a solution to support Talking Therapies workforce. So we started the journey by conducting some market engagement discovery, which involved some workshops with services, understanding how they operate in more depth, identifying common challenges and requirements. And from that, we built out a high-level solution design which could support them with overcoming some of these challenges. The four main things that we're highlighting here are number one, robust worker governance. So at NHSP, we are required to recruit to both NHS recruitment and framework standards, which gives services visibility and assurance of complete governance and compliance. We've revised our registration process to incorporate all of the requirements and accreditations needed to deliver talking therapy services. The main aim for us is to retain trained and qualified staff within the system and also provide assurance to the services that clinical activity is being undertaken to the standards that they would expect. So the second one is that around our deployment system. So services would be manually uploading demand onto our deployment system, which is called Staff Bank, and this platform provides access to bank members to self-book into suitable demand. So the system contains inbuilt controls that will specifically match them to suitable shifts based on their skills and experience. And we've also dedicated a delivery team to support in placing workers directly as well. So there's two alternative routes that they can do via the self-book access or via our delivery team that can help to place them into the right roles. So the third one is National Bank. So the pilot that we've been running is via our National Bank delivery model, which I'll detail a little bit more shortly. But the broad premise of National Bank is to build a national pool of specialised therapists for services to draw from. So the length of placements, any specific local requirements will be determined by the service's needs. And whilst the bank would probably be more suited to remote delivery, as it's focused on widening pool availability beyond just your existing areas or regions, we can also support with sourcing therapists to deliver in-person care as well. And our service engagement model, which will involve regular contact regarding day-to-day operations and demand, frequent review meetings to run through challenges, issues, performance, etc., and a consistent link into the NHSE national team to ensure that our directional focus and priority will always remain aligned to their national guidance. Next slide, please. So what is National Bank? As a quick whistle-stop tour, it essentially acts as a supplementary bank resource that complements in-house banks by acting as an alternative route to market to agency support. Our main aims are to support with the reduction of agency spend and reliance on agencies and outsourced provision by delivering experienced workers at lower cost and providing access to an expanded pool of staff beyond just the internal bank. It also provides a platform to facilitate collaboration at ICS level for services that would wish to maximise system working. Next slide, please. So what does National Bank mean and cost for you? So it's an obligation-free sign-up with no subscription charges or minimal order conditions. Our fees will remain less than agencies and alternatives to outsourced options, meaning that we can support you with delivering true savings. We're framework agnostic, so we can be led by the trust or service procurement preferences, and it's a transactional fee model, meaning that you pay as you go, so no contractual obligation to use the bank unless you need to. Next slide, please. So in terms of the overall service responsibilities, our priority focus at NHSP will be around the attraction and onboarding of new workers into the bank pool. We contract with the workers on all placements and support with placement bookings, in-life compliance management and payroll facilitation, with first-line query support always available as well. The services would have responsibility for supporting provision of equipment and system access, local inductions, any local system training where necessary, and some agency migration support. They'll also provide supervision in line with Talking Therapies manual requirements, which should give you better visibility on the quality of therapy care that is being delivered. I think that's me. Next slide is over back to you, Hayley.
Fantastic, thank you. So I now get to do my sales pitch. So I think one of the questions that will naturally come up for all of us is, well, why would I join the NHS Talking Therapies National Bank? So I think there's many reasons why you would join the bank, and kind of looking at those in a bit more detail, it's very much an opportunity for individuals who have trained within talking therapies, and that's in all of the different talking therapies that we offer within our program. So we've got our CBT, our counselling for depression, IPT, DIT, EMDR, PWPs, the list goes on. So when we're talking about the staff bank, we're talking about all of those individuals, and it's very much a bank that kind of is going to value bank members and their development. So we are currently looking at ways in which we can consider CPD opportunities specifically for our bank staff working within talking therapies. As you will know, we're really closely aligned with David and Adrian, our clinical advisors, who are equally and fully supportive of this model and are looking at ways in which we can think about what CPD opportunities can be offered by those individuals and others that they know. What it also offers is a first choice of placements and access to those. So we'll hear a bit more from Christina, one of our pilot sites, shortly, but the idea very much is that services will be able to put forward to the bank, we need X number of PWPs or X number of high intensity therapists because we have vacancies, maternity leave, long-term sickness, whatever it might be. Or it could actually be we're a service that needs additional assessments for this period of time, and we're looking for PWPs who specifically like doing assessments that would potentially want to kind of offer this as an opportunity. So there's lots and lots of different ways in which the bank can be used, but it's very much driven by the service's needs, and obviously those that are then registered with the bank being kind of that preferred option. So again, thinking about an instance where there is a high intensity practitioner, for instance, who specialises in treating a particular disorder, it might actually be that if a service has a high level of trauma cases, for instance, and an individual particularly likes working within trauma focused CBT, that would be a really good match for that service, and potentially we can be as a team in terms of NHS professionals and the service matching those individuals up. The bank being a national bank means that placements can be picked up across the country. So for instance, if we look at somebody who maybe is in Cornwall and there is a need in using Merseycare as our example pilot site, Merseycare up in the north of England, it means that that individual can potentially be offering remote work to that service up in the north of England, and the patients themselves don't experience anything different in terms of what we would expect from a high quality talking therapy service. Equally, services may have a need for face-to-face. And again, as we build the staff bank pool, there will hopefully be individuals in and around the area that will happily provide some face-to-face input, or potentially will be willing to and able to relocate to an area for a 6-week placement, for instance. So there's lots and lots of different ways in which it can be used, and we are really, really trying to encourage that flexibility. Services can request, we particularly want remote delivery, we particularly want face-to-face delivery, we particularly want this modality, and kind of we will work then with NHS professionals to look at that being delivered. The other exciting thing is the pay, and I noticed there has been a question in the chat around pay. So as with any NHS professionals bank, individuals who are registered and working with the bank are paid at the top of band, and the majority of that money will obviously go to that individual. So individual PWPs who are qualified and registered will receive a top of band 5, and high intensity therapists of all modalities who are qualified in the NHS Talking Therapies modality that they are delivering and are accredited with the relevant professional body will get top of band 7. The other thing that we are doing, which I will talk about in a moment, is looking at, once we have started to roll the pilot out and kind of made sure we've road tested all of the different things that we want to road test, ways in which we can expand further into other roles within talking therapies. So for instance, looking at supervisor roles and lead PWP roles and lead high intensity roles, etc. There is another question I think that's just coming up in the chat around, does that band 7 include counsellors within talking therapy services? Absolutely, yes. Nationally, we have always been very, very clear that we recommend all high intensity therapists, which are including counsellors who are trained in the relevant IAP modality and are accredited in the relevant body, should be being paid at a band 7 rate in line with their CBT counterparts. So this model mirrors nationally what we would recommend all services are doing. The work is flexible, so it's very much aimed to suit your lifestyle. And so again, individuals might substantively be employed in other roles, either in talking therapy services or in other areas, and they might want to pick up for a period of time during the year some additional evening work to top up their salary. Or for instance, they might be individuals who only want to do bank work and therefore kind of find their work through that route. They could be individuals who are part-time and on occasion want to pick up some additional work. Or they could be individuals who are retired and want to come back into the workforce, but only for 3 months of the year, because the rest of the year they want to dedicate to spending time with their family, going traveling, doing whatever it is they might want to be doing in terms of enjoying their retirement. So again, the idea is that it's flexible, and there isn't a kind of a rule that individuals have to be working a certain amount, or kind of offering specific things. So we want to kind of get as many people registered and back into the workforce as is possible. We as a national team, NHS England, have paid thousands and thousands of pounds of public money to train our staff in the various modalities. And what we want to do is ensure that our public and our patients get the most out of that money, and that we keep individuals in the workforce for as long as we possibly can. The other benefits are that you work 1 week and get paid the next. So unlike us in kind of substantive roles where we will get paid at the end of the month, when you are working for the staff bank, you do the work, and at the end of that week, you're then paid. There is robust supervision and CPD opportunities. So there is an expectation, as Sam has talked about, that individuals who are registered with the bank and are on placement with services will receive exactly the same supervision that we would expect in line with the IAPT manual, NHS Talking Therapies manual. Need to put some money in the swear box. That you would have in any service. So there is an expectation that bank staff will receive case management supervision, line management supervision, clinical skills supervision. There is the opportunity for bank staff, if they want to, and services are willing to support it, for them to become involved in in-house CPD opportunities. We will also have CPD opportunities available via the bank as we start to progress. There are also in-service placements. So again, it's very much feeling part of a team. You're not working kind of externally to that team. Even if you are remote, you are part of a team, and you will be working alongside that service in exactly the same way as you would do if you were working for them substantively. It could also be that you're working for a service, you sign up to the bank, and when that service puts out for overtime, that overtime is picked up via the bank route, and you are during that time earning top of band for that piece of work that you're doing, rather than your normal rate of pay that you would be earning if you were working for the service and doing overtime in the kind of usual way. You can build holiday allowance with the bank, and you can also build and are entitled to sick pay. There is a pension scheme that is available if people want to opt into that. There isn't a kind of a must do, but again, it's there if people want to. And people can book and manage their placements online. So this is the individuals themselves, and then also, as Sam has explained, the services. So there are different ways in which we can support individuals to book placements. I think that's probably my sales pitch over. I'm sure there will be things to add later on, but I think I'm now going to pass you. So if we go to the next slide. Oh no, it's me still. Sorry. So roles in scope at the moment, and I've talked briefly about this. So we're in a pilot phase, and the reason that we wanted to start with a pilot, even though in all honesty I was very much wanting to go global, Sam and the team had to keep my expectations real. We're looking at initially starting off with PWPs and high intensity therapists. So PWPs have to be registered with the bank, trained in the NHS Talking Therapies, or IAPT as was, PWP training, and registered with either the BABCP or the BPS. If you are trained and are registered, you can register with the bank, and you will then be able to undertake shifts. From a high intensity perspective, as I've, I hope, laboured the point of, it doesn't just include cognitive behavioural therapy. Often when you hear services talking about high intensity therapies, automatically people associate that with CBT and think that that's kind of the only thing that we're going to be offering. As a bank, we are looking for the whole range of modalities to be registered with us. So we've got CBT, counselling for depression, interpersonal therapy, dynamic interpersonal therapy, behavioural couples therapy for depression, EMDR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. So all of the different modalities that we offer within Talking Therapies, we're really, really keen to ensure are registered with the bank and can then be deployed out into services where there are shortages in these modalities for whatever reason that might be. The other thing that we're hopeful to develop, but again, going back to keeping my expectations reasonable rather than going global, we do want to look at over time branching out into the supervisors that are required within NHS Talking Therapies. So we know that often workforce expansion is challenged by the lack of supervision provision that we have, and often people are having to go externally to access that. So one of the things again that we're keen to do is individuals who have undertaken the NHS Talking Therapy supervisor training, are trained in a particular modality and are able to offer supervision within that modality, can register on the bank as a supervisor and will then be able to work in line kind of with the manual recommendations, providing supervision out in different services. That model might work slightly differently to obviously the model of the high intensity and PWP placements, in that we would probably expect placements for PWPs and high intensities to be kind of possibly a bit longer term. Whereas for supervisors, I would imagine that a service may have a need, for instance, for an afternoon of EMDR a week, in which case an EMDR supervisor might possibly be supervising across 3 or 4 different services if they were to be doing it via that bank route. You will have seen recently through our futures channels, or hopefully will have seen through our futures channels, that the national team have been working on a senior high intensity job description, which includes the supervision role. So we will be looking to follow that job description within these supervisor roles. So our band 5 PWPs will be paid at top of band 5. Our high intensity therapists will be paid at top of band 7, and our supervisors in the various high intensity modalities will be paid at an 8A, top of 8A, because that's what mirrors the job descriptions that we nationally have been working on. I think that is me, and I'm going to pass you across to my colleague Christina. No, I'm passing you to Claire. Sorry.
That's all right. Don't worry. Not a problem at all. Hi, everyone. It's lovely to be part of this forum today. My name is Claire, and I'm Head of Service Delivery for National Bank. So my team will predominantly support you through your journey of joining our bank, from applying, interview, compliance, and booking shifts. We are a small team, so we offer a personalised service, and we will assist you right the way through that process of joining. So what happens is you'd need to apply to join through our application portal, and there will be links provided to do that. And if you have the correct professional registration and your CV meets the requirements, then we would put you forward for interview. At that point, you'd be interviewed with a clinician and someone from my team as well. And once successful at interview, we would then arrange a face-to-face document check with you. And at that document check, we would need to see your right to work, 2 proofs of address, along with evidence of your qualifications as well, and any certificates that you have. At that point, you then move into compliance, and someone in my compliance team would then take you through the onboarding process. And part of that, there will be a need to complete your DBS. We'll run OccuHealth checks, and we'll carry out your work health assessment as well. We would then request your reference details. And whilst completing your application, what we do ask is we need to make sure that all your online and face-to-face mandatory training is up to date. Now, if you already have that through your current trust, then we can look to port that across to us so that you don't obviously need to do it again. We'll also notify you of any service-specific training that's required, and you would need to complete this as part of your compliance as well. Then once all your compliance tasks are completed, you'll receive a welcome pack from us, an ID badge, and we'll work with the trust to get you started and get you booked into shifts. Obviously, it is flexible working, so you book and work when is suitable for you. And my team will support you every step of the way to ensure that your recruitment and onboarding is as smooth and as quick as possible. And then everything is managed within my team, so we would then support you in life as well, and any queries or questions that you have. Thank you. I think I hand back to Hayley now.
I'm on mute. Thank you very much, Claire. That's really helpful. So I think that some of these questions have come up in the chat, which is great. So hopefully we will be able to kind of clarify some of these things. What I would also say is that myself and Vicky in our NHS England team, Christina, and all of the guys at NHSP have been working on a frequently asked questions document. It's a fluid document, so it's questions that have come up for us over the course of time that we have been then kind of looking into and answering. But equally, what I would say is part of what we really want from this webinar is as many questions as you kind of can throw at us, so that we can ensure that if they're not covered in this document, then we make sure that they are. This document can be found on our futures page. So Vicky and the team has set up an incredible page within our futures section specifically for the NHS Talking Therapies National Bank, and within it there are the FAQs and the document. So the link to that has just been put into the chat. So one of the questions that has come up in the chat and is then answered here is, as an agency clinician and receiving an hourly rate, does that only cover the clinical session, or will admin time be included within that? Because I think there is often occasions where it can mean individuals do end up undertaking quite a lot of unpaid work. So work through the bank is booked on a day or half day shift, and it's expected that the clinical contact time calculated pro rata in line with NHS Talking Therapies manual. So, for instance, if you are a full-time high intensity therapist, there will be an expectation that an individual within that week will complete 20 attended clinical hours, a PWP 18 to 20 attended clinical hours. So admin time is included in your bank shift. So if you are a whole-time equivalent bank worker within a service and are doing 37.5 hours in that week, you would be expected as a high intensity therapist of those 37.5 hours to do 20 hours of clinical work, and the other hours would be then attributed to your administration, attendance at supervision, team meetings, etc. The other one is if you're an individual working in substantive roles and want to, for whatever reason, undertake some additional hours, how does it work alongside the working time directive? So this question has come up quite a few times. There is a maximum working week under the working time directive, and that averages at 48 hours a week. So if you want to work for more than 48 hours, you need to opt out of the working time directive. What I would say of anyone in our line of work is that obviously the more hours you do, the potential kind of impact that that will be having on your well-being. So I think it's being really mindful of the hours that you're working and how that is impacting on you and your kind of friends and family, because that's hugely important. But there is more information available on the working time directive and how it can work and how you can opt out of it if you would want to on the NHS professionals platform, of which the link is within our FAQs. So will bank staff be able to access CPD or training from the service that they are on placement with? Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we previously did in the services I worked in is any bank staff that we had working with us, if we had a CPD event that we were running, we opened that up to those individuals because we very much wanted them to feel like part of our team. So services can offer, if they would want to, anything that they feel would be beneficial to that individual undertaking their role. So there are potentially CPD opportunities going on within services that bank staff can absolutely tap into within their bank shifts. There will also be CPD offers available via the bank. We have got a resource pack that we've developed with various different CPD opportunities within it that individuals, when they register with the bank, can go through and can start to look at accessing if they would like to. So there is a link to that resource pack in our FAQs. So I think we touched on this previously. If an individual has got a particular interest in working with a specific disorder or in a specific way, for instance, an individual may particularly like offering digitally enabled therapy or text type, or only working over the phone or only working face to face, can that be accommodated? Yes, absolutely. So one of the things that we have been working on and continue to work on is when completing your application, you can specify which areas of interests that you have or whether there are any kind of specific working preferences within the personal summary. They can then be made available to your service or to the services that are looking for bank agency staff within your skills profile. And we can then look to, a bit like a dating website, match up the individual with the service preferences. So the idea is that that skills profile that you have, which is your own personal skills profile, will go with you throughout your agency journey, and services will be able to draw down from that and can link you kind of with the right people at the right time. So what happens if a bank member of staff comes and works with your service, gets on really well, you think they would be a huge asset to the team, and a vacancy comes up and they want to apply for that vacancy and become a substantive member of staff? Is there a fee? No. So staff that are wishing to move from the bank into substantive NHS talking therapies roles don't incur an introductory fee. We're really keen, as I've said, to ensure that the money that we have invested, the public money we have invested in training our individuals, stays within NHS commissioned services. So it's not just NHS Trust, because we're aware of the fact that many NHS talking therapy services are run by other organisations that are not NHS, but they're running NHS commissioned services. And we want to make sure that individuals stay within NHS talking therapies. So no, there isn't a fee. Individuals can still maintain their registration with the bank. They can still pick up other work in other areas if they want to. Equally, as a substantive member of staff, then in that service, they might want to pick up overtime every now and then via the bank route. That's absolutely fine. So the other one, which I think I've just touched on, is about whether, if you're in a service that provides NHS commissioned talking therapies, but it's not an NHS organisation, can you still access staff via the bank, and can those staff also be registered with the bank? Yes to both. So as I say, we recognise, and I think it's the way the NHS is moving generally, NHS commissioned services are not always run by NHS trusts and organisations. So as long as the service is providing an NHS commissioned NHS talking therapy service, they will be able to work with NHS professionals to access the bank and draw down from that bank when they have that need. Equally, if you're an NHS Talking Therapies member of staff that is working for an organisation that is not an NHS organisation, but you're in an NHS commissioned talking therapy service, absolutely you can be registered with the bank. For an individual who is registering with the bank, what's most important is that you're trained in the relevant modality and that you are registered or accredited with the relevant professional body. Once you have those things, you can absolutely register with us and then become part of that NHS Talking Therapies National Bank kind of team family that we grow across the country. Next slide, please. Fantastic. So how do you register? There are various different ways. So if you are a service that is looking to tap into the NHS Professionals Bank and want to start to look at how you get staff from that bank, we've given contact details here for the Senior Customer Manager at NHSP, Karen. So Karen can't be with us sadly today. She's living her best life in South Africa. But Karen has been working really closely with us as a team over the last kind of year or so, and Karen would be the point of contact initially. As I say, we are in a pilot phase, so we are gradually building up the amount of people we have registered with the bank with the amount of people that are then being deployed into services, because what we don't want to do, or what I wanted to do but was very rightly told we couldn't do, was go out with a big bang and not make sure that all of the bits and pieces were fine-tuned in the background. So if you are a service and you want to start thinking about becoming a service registered with the bank to use what the bank will have to offer, please contact Karen. If you're a qualified high intensity therapist of any of those modalities, or a qualified PWP, and you are registered or accredited with the relevant professional body, then the links below, which will come through on the slide pack and are also available on our Futures platform, will enable you to be taken straight through to the application for the role. So there are different applications. We have one for PWPs, we have one for high intensity CBT therapists, and we have one for non-CBT modalities within NHS Talking Therapies. Thank you so much. So I'm going to pass you now to our colleague Christina, who has been an absolute lifesaver in all things bank related. So Christina has been working with us from the very, very beginning and was one of the services that kind of came on board in our early kind of focus groups, and is now very excitingly the first pilot for the staff bank. So over to you, Christina.
Oh, thank you very much, Hayley. It's really nice to be here today, and I'd certainly share plenty of Hayley's enthusiasm for this project, because I think it's a really, really valuable project, and I think it's really important. And I did lobby our trust really hard to get the necessary agreement to kind of be the pilot site for this. And I suppose I'm here today just to give you a little bit of my experience of what the project has been like so far, and kind of why I was keen to kind of get involved in it from a kind of a trust perspective. So I don't have any slides as such. I'm just going to tell you what my experience is. So I guess one of the concerns that we have had within Merseycare is, just some of the challenges to governance, to have, kind of oversight of the work when we outsource to other providers. And we've had some really positive experience with outsourcing, but we've also had some really difficult experiences with outsourcing, things like we've had some IG breaches where notes have been accessed, kind of by the external agency when the piece of work has been finished. We've had some confusion around kind of appropriate qualifications, appropriate registration, and all of these things, though, isolated instance, do cause some difficulties for us as a trust, because when you outsource work, Merseycare still remains responsible for that work. So when there are difficulties with governancing the work, that that difficulty becomes our difficulty, because it's ultimately our service users. So from a governance perspective, just kind of bearing some of those challenges in mind, we're very keen to be part of a solution where we could have, greater oversight of the governance, if you like. And one of the things I really like about the project is that people who will come to work for Merseycare via the bank, they become in essence our staff. So for the time that they're working for us on the bank, our view is that we would treat them as our staff. Then they can have access to the CPD that we offer our staff. They get some of the benefits of kind of being part of the team and being embedded with our service, and just some of the additional benefits that brings for them, as well as kind of for us from a governance perspective. I think there's also financial implications, isn't there? That sometimes agency staff, there's additional fees to pay for agency staff. They can be quite expensive. There's also, that fee if they then become substantive staff. So from, thinking about how we best use public money, a national bank represents, in my view, a better use of that public money, that we're kind of using our money in a a really kind of appropriate way. I think the other thing that kind of left me feeling a bit sad over the years is, as Hayley's mentioned, all the people that we train, that we then lose that talent to the NHS when kind of maybe people choose for whatever reason to kind of work for kind of private agencies. And to some degree there wasn't something from within the NHS that kind of offered people the flexibility of kind of working in a bank agency way, but actually doing that for the NHS. So it felt like we were losing some of our talent because we weren't able to offer them kind of an alternative. And this, to me, this project kind of offers that opportunity for people who may want to for whatever reason, it, kind of suits their lifestyle, suits where they're at, kind of want to maybe work in a more, kind of bank or agency type way, but actually they can now do that for the NHS. So that, that was part of my enthusiasm, part of my hopes for kind of being involved in this project. And so far, we've, found it really easy, NHS professionals and, Hayley and her team, they've really been with us, kind of every step of the way, and have, made it really easy for us. They've come in, they've trained our staff in the system that they've developed for kind of booking shifts. I can't use the technical language. I'm not very techie in that way, but they've, kind of come in, they've developed this platform, and they've come in, kind of trained our staff on kind of how to use this system, so that, when we're ready to kind of book shifts, our staff have already been trained, already know how to do that. I think the other thing that's really helpful is that once staff are on the bank, they get lots of the, kind of generic NHS mandatory training while they're, kind of on the bank, and before they come to kind of work for us, which, as we know, it's often that, those early days where we're waiting for staff to get all the mandatory training done, to, kind of get all the compliance, all that kind of stuff. All of that's been done. So by the time we kind of put bank shifts out and people pick up those bank shifts, that, they come to us ready to go, if you like. So they come to us ready to, ready to start work, really. The bits of training that we would need to do then kind of are kind of the more kind of in-house role specific training, but that's far less than, the full range of kind of NHS mandatory training. I guess in time, one of the aims or one of the hopes of the bank is that staff would be trained to use IAPTIS or PCMIS, which tend to be the two main kind of patient record systems that are used in Talking Therapies. And again, if staff, bank staff had that training before they came to us, that, that's another piece of training that we don't have, that's already been done. So it means that staff are closer to being able to just kind of, in a really quick, timely way, kind of pick up those shifts and get going with things. So yeah, as I say, the whole project's been, it's been really easy, and NHS professionals have, kind of really worked hard alongside us to, to kind of move it forward and, kind of make it smooth. And I'm really pleased to say that we have done some interviews, and, we've got some people, who've been successful at interview, who are ready to go on the bank. So we're ever a step nearer to, kind of offering out our first shifts, and, having our first bank member of staff. And I'll happily come back and tell you of our experiences when that happens, because I've no doubt it will, it will go really well. I think that's it from my point of view. If there are any questions, please pop them in the chat, or sorry, not in the chat, pop them in the Q&A. If there's anything I've missed that I should have said, please somebody pipe up and remind me. But yeah, just to say, so far, I'm really pleased to be part of this. I'm really positive about it all.
Amazing. Thank you, Christina. I think the only thing just to say a huge thank you to you for, in terms of all your involvement with our pilot to date, but also with the interviews. So as Christina mentioned, there's been some interviews already for individuals who have wanted to register with the bank. So whenever an individual wants to register, be they a PWP or a high intensity therapist, we will be doing interviews with those individuals before they automatically join the bank. So the other thing that we want to make sure that services can really rely on is that clinically these individuals have been screened, as well as all of the other compliance stuff that the NHS professionals team will do alongside that. So clinically, we have worked with Christina and others to ensure that the questions that we ask from a clinical perspective are relevant to each of the different modalities, and that once you're registered, you know that you're registered because you're very much kind of then able to kind of competently work within all of the different services across the country. So just a huge thank you to Christina and the team for being part of that process as well. So I think slightly ahead of schedule, we are at questions. And I think there's been quite a few questions that have come through, some of which I think we've answered, but it would be great to kind of potentially go over some of those again as well if other people haven't seen. So am I passing back to Vanessa?
Ta-da! And if by magic. Yes, you had loads of questions. You've kept me very busy. So I'm going to jump straight into it. So we've got some key themes that are coming through in your questions. Lots of conversations about pay and compensation. Talked a lot about supervision and staffing and employment. I'm going to try and cover all of them and bounce between them. So first, let's kind of talk about pay. People are asking, why are people paid at the top of the band? Is there a risk for newly qualified professionals to be attracted to the bank rather than staying in services where they would be paid at the bottom of the spine point?
Really good question. Panel, do you want me to pick that one up? And then I think Christina is going to come in as well. So why are we paying at the top of the band? So if you look at the other models that NHS professionals offer with all of their other staff, pay is at top of band. And we want to ensure that we are equally and kind of from that parity of esteem perspective, ensuring that individuals within NHS Talking Therapies are receiving exactly the same kind of benefits. Is there a risk of individuals both from a low intensity and high intensity perspective joining the bank rather than working within services? We are kind of mindful of the fact that there is a potential, and I think individuals will, and I think it's a good thing that they'll register with the bank when they qualify and are registered, because it builds the pool that we have and that we can draw upon. But I think when we've looked at that and we started to really think about that risk, it would be relatively unusual for individuals to want to or be able to give up substantive roles in whatever organisation they're working for to go across to what is potentially a 0 hours contract, because with the bank we can't guarantee work. We absolutely know there is a huge need out there in talking therapies, and there will be, I would imagine, lots and lots of demand, but we can't guarantee that demand as a bank. And so we don't think there is a mass exodus likely to happen of individuals giving up the security of substantive contracts and all that comes with to move into a role that would be 0 hours. That will work for some people, as it does in all different types of fields, not just within talking therapies. And for those people, great. We keep them in the workforce and that's what we want. But for others, we don't think that necessarily is going to be a risk that they would potentially understandably want to take. But I think Christina also wanted to add something to that as well.
Yeah, just not a huge amount to add. I think that was largely what I was thinking. But I guess there's also something, isn't there, about the risk that PWPs or people kind of coming straight from qualification onto the bank actually for their development they could potentially miss something. I think there is a lot of value to kind of staying embedded within a team and kind of learning on the ground as part of a team. So I guess it's just to kind of add that bit, whereas we think the risk might be small, but I guess there's also something to think about, kind of from that clinical perspective, that it's about kind of the staff having that opportunity to kind of learn embedded within a team that they might want to think about.
Yeah,
absolutely. I guess also just to come back in on that, sorry Vanessa, I think it's really important to remember that we've modelled the bank model on what already exists in terms of nursing, administration, etc. So if we think about nursing, it's not unusual for newly qualified nurses to complete their training, to go into a role and to register with the bank at the same time and pick up additional overtime, either in their place of work or with other places of work. And we want that to be exactly the same for NHS Talking Therapies. And we don't see a mass exodus of nurses. We see a mass exodus of nurses for other reasons, but not because they're all leaving, having just qualified and joining the bank. So I think it's important that this is already tried and tested in other NHS professions. So we kind of are confident that it's not going to be something that's hugely different in NHS Talking Therapies.
Yes, that's actually really nice. You've answered another question right there. There was someone asked how different it was from the existing banks that are already on offer. So as we pull on the theme of supervision, two people have asked similar questions. They say, is supervision and CPD time paid for, or is this done in their own time? And another person's asked, would time spent having supervision, case management and clinical supervision be paid for on top of band rate or at all?
So it would be included. So if you are, for instance, I'm using a simplified example just because I'm not hugely great at maths. But if you are, for instance, doing a full-time position in a talking therapy service as a high intensity therapist and you're working for 37.5 hours, the expectation is you will be paid obviously for 37.5 hours via NHS professionals, and within that 37.5 hours you would be expected to do up to 20 hours of clinical work directly with a service user patient, and alongside that your administration, i.e. clinical notes, etc., planning for sessions, your supervision and attendance at any team meetings, CPD activities, etc., that the service has. So all of it is included in that hourly rate. There isn't an on top of that you will receive extra for supervision, CPD, etc. The amount is the hourly rate across the course of the week, which includes all of those things. Does that kind of, Sam, Claire, cover, do you think? And if that doesn't, for whoever kind of has asked that question, please do kind of add to it in the chat and we can make sure that we've clarified further.
Yeah, that does cover it. Thanks, Hayley.
Wonderful. Okay, so there's a couple of questions have just popped up kind of around employment. If we were employed by our local NHS trust and on the National Staff Bank, will the bank be classed as a second job and taxed as a second job? And then as a two-part question, someone has also asked about retirement and whether or not you can work full-time for the bank. Yeah, I'll leave that with you.
Go for it, Claire.
Okay, so for the first part of the question, the answer is yes, that's correct. It's classed as a second job and will be taxed as a second job. There is a question on the application form around taxation and if you already have a current role. So we will make sure that we check that you have answered that correctly as well, so that you are taxed correctly. In response to the second question in relation to retirement, if you are retired, there needs to be obviously a break between when you retire and then when you start picking up bank shifts. But I don't believe there is restriction on how many shifts you can work as long as you are comfortable and you're working within working time directive.
I think I'll just to add to that as well. I think in terms of whether it's full-time work on the bank or part-time work, I guess that's flexible by service. I think there's an element of full-time focus in terms of consistency of the care that your patients are receiving. But at the same time, there's also an acknowledgement that a need for ad hoc support will be there as well, so that there'll be a balance of both, hopefully, across the bank.
Perfect. Okay, so moving on to some questions about supervision. So we've got some of our CBT therapists provide a small amount of supervision currently as part of their Band 7 roles. If they're offered a Band 8A on the national bench for this, it could be problematic for current supervision arrangements for services that don't employ an 8A therapist. And then someone else actually asks if it's possible to get supervision training with you. And then as a broader question, someone's asking if commissioning supervisory work or if it's purely casework as part of their offer? Quite a lot of questions.
Yeah, okay. I'll possibly get you to repeat some of those as I go through. So I think the first question, so I'm saying I'll repeat them. So the first question was around if a supervisor or if a therapist is doing some supervision as part of their role at a band 7, and we potentially offer that as an 8A, are they likely to then potentially leave their role and kind of join the bank? I think there's a couple of things. The job description for the 8A senior therapist, which covers all of the different modalities, not just CBT, also includes a number of other aspects of the role. It isn't just supervision. So I think it's important that people look at that job description that we've published in detail so that they can see all of the different elements that would be required. I think that also, if we go back to the conversation we were having around newly qualified staff, again, an individual may possibly wish to give up substantive employment and the kind of security that comes with that to a possible 0 hours contract. But it's unlikely that lots of people would kind of comfortably be able to do that. And so, yes, there may be some, but I can't anticipate or don't anticipate that will be huge amounts. I think it's something, and this is why rightly Sam and Claire and the team didn't want us to go kind of big bang. It's something that we have to kind of work through as we're gradually rolling things out and make sure that we're constantly in that feedback loop, checking in with regions and services and fine tuning everything to ensure that it's only positively impacting on the programme and not having an adverse impact. That was the first question. Second question was, remind me.
Could I jump in on that one, Hayley? Because I guess
Yeah,
I
of
was
course.
thinking as well, it may depend on what the needs of the service are. So, just kind of thinking about the Merseycare position at the moment, what our need is. We need HIT therapist hours. So we would probably put a shift on specifically for clinical work for HITs. And that wouldn't necessarily include supervision, because them providing supervision, because actually what we need, or what we might be looking for is the kind of the therapy role. So there may be kind of a situation where what the shift is specifically for clinical work, and when the time comes there may be a shift that is specifically to provide supervision. So it may be that it's a bit more cut and dry than in substantive roles, because I guess within the substantive role, for kind of development, for variety, all that kind of stuff, we know that HITs do offer more of a mix in terms of kind of clinical work and supervision. However, just kind of thinking, kind of around what our need in Merseycare currently is, that we would probably be putting shifts out specifically for HIT therapy. So it may, that may kind of come into the shifts that are out there. So it may be a bit more kind of cut and dry than it is for substantive roles.
So the next question that I asked was, is it possible to get supervision training with you? Which I feel like.
So the answer to that is no. Yes and no. Yes, you can get it with us in terms of NHS England. No, in terms of NHS professionals. So to access the NHS Talking Therapies supervisor training, you would do so in the normal way. So that would be via your regional NHS England teams, working with what used to be Health Education England, is now NHS England, but the WTE, Workforce Training and Education kind of team within that. So working services will be able to put forward individuals that they feel are kind of ready to move into those supervisor roles, undertake that supervision training, and once you've undertaken that training, just as with any other training, that then becomes part of your CV and your skills profile, and you would then be able to offer supervision via the bank route.
That's great. So someone asks, I am an existing bank member as a HCA. How do I pick up shifts as a PWP? Does my manager need to authorise this so I can book shifts?
So as a PWP, so they're completely separate banks. So although they follow a similar model, we've modelled the kind of principles of the NHS Talking Therapies Bank on what NHS professionals already offer. They are a bespoke, separate national bank for talking therapy services. So to register as a PWP, as I said before, you need to have undertaken the PWP training, and you also have to be registered with the relevant professional body. And you can then register via the links that we shared within the slide pack and that are also available on our Futures platform. That will then take you through that process that Claire described, and you will become a registered PWP on the NHS Talking Therapies Bank and can then access shifts in various talking therapy services as they arise.
So actually someone has asked, to go back to like the risk element, if the bank is inundated with interest, is there a risk that there won't be sufficient work for staff?
Yes, hence the reason why Sam and the team were really keen for not to go out with the kind of the big bang. So what we want to do over the course of time, and why we are working so closely together and meeting weekly, is very much to look at trying to gradually increase the number of individuals that are registered on the bank, alongside bringing services into the bank that need those individuals, so that we can ensure that there is a match between the number of people registered and the work that is available. We know there is a huge shortfall out in the talking therapies workforce, hence my let's just get going and offer it to everybody. But equally, we know it takes time to get people registered. We have to do all of the clinical interviews, etc. It takes time for us to work with the services on contracting and all of those things. Although it is a pay as you go, if you don't use it, you don't pay. There still needs to be contracts in place in the background which take time to set up. So we're trying to really, really gradually grow the bank, such that over the coming months and kind of year, we will see kind of it hopefully looking very different to how it looks now. But that's why we want to also make sure expectations are kind of realistic, and that we grow it kind of gradually and get it right as we grow it, rather than do what I wanted to do, which was big bang and then probably cock it up.
So someone's asked about sick leave and then another about holiday. So if staff register for the bank and go off sick from their substantive post, take annual leave in terms of their well-being, or are not working to expectations, will employers have access to see whether staff have undertaken work for the bank? And then the second question is, how do you accrue holiday entitlement at the bank?
So I think first question around whether an individual is working during a period of being signed off sick or taking annual leave, and that annual leave being due to well-being, would potentially be something I think that Claire and Sam would need to answer. I think there will be one answer for the sick, because I'm again thinking in terms of nursing, for instance, knowing that if you were a nurse and you were signed off sick and you started to pick up bank shifts, my understanding, but Claire and Sam will kind of correct me if this isn't right, is that would be classed as fraud. And then that would potentially be kind of a gross misconduct, and kind of be managed in that way. In terms of holiday, I don't believe if an individual has taken annual leave and then picks up shifts, there is no way, as there isn't for any of us, knowing that annual leave has been taken from a well-being perspective, or whether it's been taken because they've got to use their week's leave before they lose it at the end of that year and want to pick up some additional shifts. But Claire, Sam, please do say if that isn't the case.
Yes, that's correct. All of the above that you've just said is correct. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think the challenge is how we would monitor that as well, because they could be working for an organisation that sits outside of the Talking Therapies National Bank as well. So that's something we would need to consider.
Yeah, I was going to say visibility is obviously quite key to that, and being informed of that information, so that any services that are part of Talking Therapies, we would actively encourage them to let us know if they've got staff that they are aware who are registered, are on sick leave, or do fall under any of those conditions you mentioned, so that we can make the necessary arrangements to ensure they can't book bank shifts in that period as well. But again, the biggest challenge we have with all of our different services that we provide is visibility of that information. So
great. So Someone's asked, if we used agency staff we would normally interview before taking them on, is it possible, or are they just matched with the need?
So again, I will rely on Sam, Claire, and Christina to come in here. But my understanding is that we will have interviewed those individuals prior to them being able to register with the bank in the first place. But that as services are matched with an individual or vice versa, those services can have a kind of brief screening call with that individual to make sure that they both feel that the service is the right placement for them. And if there are any kind of concerns with that from either party, then that placement doesn't need to then go ahead. So I think that there is going to be kind of an opportunity if services want it, and I would have absolutely taken this up as an operational manager to check in with that individual and make sure that they are the right fit. Is that the case, guys?
Yes, that's correct. And I think just to note as well, obviously, we would only match people with roles that fit within their criteria modalities that they have experience in as well. So they wouldn't be able to work elsewhere without the correct coding.
That's great. So someone's asked how much the services are charged. There have been 2 questions on this, and I've actually lost it. You've got lots of questions that I am currently working through. So they talk, how much does it cost the service per hour? And then someone else asks on top, what are the services charged?
So in terms of kind of costings, as we say, there is the individual is paid at top of band 5 if they're a PWP, top of band 7 if they are a high intensity therapist. What dependent on how many kind of hours, placements, etc. That individual is kind of signed up for will depend on then obviously kind of what invoice comes through to that service from NHS professionals. NHS professionals purely charge for the administrative aspects of kind of that individual on top of that hourly rate. So in comparison to other agencies and to outsourcing, we're talking hundreds of pounds of savings, because the margin in terms of what NHS professionals cost as an NHS organisation is purely about covering the administrative aspects that they undertake. So the majority of that money that is per hour charged goes to the individual who is doing the clinical work. The other aspects cover Sam, Claire, relying on you here, but I'm thinking kind of the more basic admin, or say basic, but admin bits around that individual kind of being in post. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
if anyone wanted a bit further information on that, then please feel free to reach out. We can have. I'm more than happy to have separate conversations.
Amazing, thank you.
Okay, so we've got some questions about DNAs. So the first one reads, if a client cancels or does not attend, would it still be paid? Is it specified attended hours? Is the hourly rate only for the clinical hour worked, or is there payment for admin time? Also, what if a client doesn't attend or cancels? And then another attendee has asked the same question again. If a client cancels at short notice, would you still be paid?
Yep, so you would still be paid, because as I say, that the whole point of this model is that this individual is working as part of that service for that period of time. So just as a substantive member of staff would be paid for their time if a client DNA'd or cancelled, so will that bank member of staff. What I would say from a bank perspective, as should be the case with substantive staff, is if there is a bank member of staff who is repeatedly getting lots of DNAs or cancellations, I, as the service, would be questioning, what's that about? Are they following the correct policies that we have in place for DNAs and cancellations? Is there something about the clinical practice that means that these individuals are getting more DNAs and cancellations? So it will be managed, or you would expect it to be managed in exactly the same way as you would manage a substantive member of staff. But in terms of pay, if you are doing a 37.5-hour week, you are paid for 37.5 hours. And that contains, in those 37.5 hours, your clinical work, your administration associated with your clinical work, your supervision, and the other aspects that come with the role, i.e. travel to and from venues, team meetings, etc.
Okay, thank you. So someone has asked, if the bank is unable to fulfill a service request, would they ever outsource to a third sector provider?
So this is one option. So I think we obviously want to ensure that it is kind of providing the highest quality clinical service, and is a reason why people kind of would access this option as the first option. And from an NHS perspective, keeping things within the NHS is that preferred option because of the costs and the amount that you can then put directly back into clinical care as a result of that. But we are aware, as I say, that workforce challenges across the board are for various different reasons, and so feel that there is very much room at the table for other options as well. So if there is a need that can't be met by the bank, then it would be reasonable that that need would then need to be met elsewhere. What it will do for us as a bank is highlight that a need hasn't been met, and we can then look into, well, why hasn't that been met? Is there anything that we need to do or develop that could kind of increase us meeting that need moving forward? But ultimately, as I say, we want to work in partnership with others to do the best thing by our patients. We don't want to kind of become the one and only that then can't potentially meet the needs, if those needs are out there. But it will enable us, if we are not able to meet a need, to really think about what's that about, how can we improve to make sure that we are able to meet that going forward.
Thank you. So we have got a question here that talks about training. So they ask, how will you account for training bank members on different service systems? For example, when they have to enter notes onto new services, I'm assuming.
So again, I'm going to probably call on Christina for some help with this as well. But my understanding and our kind of plan is that we know most NHS talking therapy services use kind of key health records. So often we will see PCMIS and IAPTUS. We know that there are others in use, but we are working with the providers of those platforms to look at ways in which we can start to upskill individuals in those platforms whilst they are registering with the bank, and it can become part of the training longer term. But what we also know is that services have their own in-house training and offer that to their substantive staff when they start, if there are specific systems that they need them to be aware of, or if there are specific drives that they need them to have access to, for instance. So that's where it comes back to that governance sitting with the service, so that the service have the ability to know that that individual can do what they need them to do on the systems that they need them to do it on. So, for instance, Christina's team provide in-house IAPTUS training. I think it was IAPTUS, wasn't it, Christina? And if an individual comes and has only had PCMIS experience, they will be able to be supported with upskilling in that IAPTUS through the IAPTUS training that Christina and the team will be able to provide. Is that right, Christina?
Yeah, absolutely. That's 100% the case. So whatever, so what, if somebody takes up a Merseycare bank shift, we would then provide them with whatever they need that hasn't already been provided while they've been on the bank or provided by NHSP. So we will provide them with whatever remains, whatever needs remain, to kind of enable them to be ready to, kind of safely work within our teams. And it's also things like training in local risk procedures, or training in local incident reporting procedures, because they may be different for each trust. So, I would very much see it as kind of the trust role to make sure that any bank members of staff have access to, kind of all of that information that they would need to kind of safely, practice safely for themselves, but also to kind of practice safely for service users. So, they'd be kind of linked in with local risk policies, local, whatever the local kind of governance policies, whatever the local governance arrangements are.
I think it's a nice follow-on question. Someone's asked, will we be expected to use our own IT equipment?
So no, the equipment will be provided by the service that you are doing the placement in. So in exactly the same way as was the case kind of during kind of COVID times. If you are working remotely, that will be couriered to you from the service, and it kind of would then be arranged to be couriered back when you finish that placement. If you were working kind of in a face-to-face setting, you would be able to go in and pick that equipment up and then give that equipment back when you'd finished. So the equipment would be provided by the service in exactly the same way as they would provide that equipment to any of their other members of staff.
Great, thank you. So the next question reads, are practitioners required to complete e-learning modules with NHSP when they are up to date with service mandatory training modules?
So
Claire,
I can
go for
answer
it.
that one. Yep. So if you've got certificates and evidence of mandatory training, you can passport that across to us. We would need to just verify it with our training department to ensure that they're happy with those certificates. And then, as I say, we passport them across into our system if they're all in date.
That's great. So then someone else has asked, do EMDR therapists need to be accredited or trained or working towards accreditation?
Yep, all high intensity therapists, as with PWPs, need to have been trained in the relevant modality and need to be accredited with the relevant professional body for that modality. So if anybody is unsure at all, that is listed really clearly in the IAPT manual, NHS Talking Therapies manual. So please do kind of refer to that so you can see exactly which professional body you need to be accredited with. But once you have that accreditation in place, then absolutely you can register with the bank. And my understanding, because I think I saw another question come up around individuals who are dual trained and whether they have to register twice. I believe, but again, I'm going to look to Claire and Sam for this, you'd register once, and within your skills profile, you would have that you are qualified in the various modalities. So if, for instance, there is an individual who is a high intensity therapist providing CBT, but they were previously qualified as a PWP, then the ability would then be to have that on their profile if they wanted to. Equally, if they were CBT trained, an EMDR trained or MBC trained, etc., they could make sure that those skills profiles had all of those modalities on them.
Yeah, that's correct.
That's great, thank you. Actually, I think that the answer is going to be the same, but I'll ask it anyway. They've said, if qualified in IAPT Children's, can you still work with adults?
No, you can't. So we, again, within the manual have been very, very clear that the CWP training is very, very different to the PWP training. And therefore, to be working as a PWP in NHS Talking Therapies services, you have to have been trained in the NHS Talking Therapies PWP course or have undertaken the recent scheme that we put on for individuals who I can't remember what the scheme was called, but it was back in 2021. And there were a number of individuals that were able to access their PWP qualification via that route. There was an exemption route. But yeah, no, you can't. So a qualified CWP at this moment in time isn't able to register on the bank. If all goes to plan with the bank, and again, we're talking kind of a good kind of year or so, if not more down the line, my vision would be, although it won't be around at this point in time, but my vision would very much be that we open it up to other psychological therapists. So we can look at moving into the CWP world, looking into patients with a severe mental illness and looking at things like dialectical behaviour therapy and all of those things. So in an ideal world, we would like to become a psychological therapies bank for all of the different services within the NHS. But at the moment, we're very much just starting with adult NHS Talking Therapies modalities.
That's great, thank you. A couple of questions on part-time working. If I already work part-time for NHS services, can I still work within the bank for a different service? And will it be possible to work a single day in the week on this bank? And if one day is worked, will admin time be included in the working day?
Yes, 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 yes. So this is part of what we really, really want to encourage is individuals who are working part-time for a service, who want to pick up some work with another service, gain some experience of another service, and only want to do that for 1 day a week, half a day a week, whatever that might be. Absolutely, yes. It will be based obviously on the service need. So if there is a service that says we want a PWP for 7.5 hours, 1 day a week, absolutely, they will be able to do that. And within that 7.5 hours, you would be paid for your 7.5 hours, but you would, within that, undertake your clinical work, the administration associated with that clinical work, and any related kind of supervision that would come from that.
Thank you. We've actually had a live response. So the attendee has asked for a bit of clarification. They said, if qualified in IAPT Children's CBT, can you still work with adults? She says, sorry, I wasn't clear. They say, sorry, I wasn't clear.
Okay, no worries. So that's a CBT therapist who has. So again, if you look in the manual, there is some really clear guidance that we've included in the most recently updated version 7 around the expectations. So to be registered as a CBT therapist within NHS Talking Therapies, and obviously accredited with the BABCP, you need to be able to show that you have worked with the 18 or over age bracket in some capacity. So if you are able to show that you have that experience, then absolutely you would be able to work within talking therapy services. But if all your experience is only in that under 18 age bracket, then no, you would need to look at getting that adult experience and then kind of being able to register.
That's great. Thank you so much. Okay, so I actually am really running out of time, but there have been a couple of questions about pensions. So in the chat, but in the Q&A box, it says, how does the pensions part work? And then we've got 2 questions of similar. So apologies, I think I missed what you said about the staff bank and pensions accrual for those already in an NHS pension scheme and for those that aren't. And then, can earnings from the bank link to your NHS pension?
So I'm going to go across to Sam and Claire for this.
Okay, so the NHS professionals pension is a separate pension. It's not an NHS pension. It's, God, Sam, remind me who it is now. It's London.
Yeah, I can't remember off the top of my head.
It's London something. But yes, and you can opt in, obviously, to our pension scheme. And but it is separate to the NHS pension. It's not the same thing.
That's great, thank you. And Jordan has asked, we've got about 3 more minutes. Jordan has asked, if we join the bank and just want a few additional hours a week, but there are not any current offerings for this, is it okay to not take up a position until the correct offer becomes available? Is there a period of time that we have to book something in to be within the bank, or can it just be used as and when we need with long periods between placements?
So again, I will double check this with Sam and Claire, but as with the other NHS professionals banks, there isn't an expectation that you do a certain amount with the bank over a certain period of time. Obviously, the more you do, the more we know you're up to date with all of the various different mandatory trainings, etc., which often annually have to take place. So if there was a gap of a period of time, I'm guessing that those kind of checks would just need to be kind of done to make sure that that individual was still registered, accredited, etc., etc. But no, there isn't an expectation that you have to register and pick up a certain amount of work within a certain period of time.
I think, Claire, you might be able to kind of clarify, but I know that we do conduct regular sort of cleanses of our system and ensuring that we're aware of who is active and inactive, but nobody would be removed from the bank without being communicated to prior. If they were inactive for a certain period, we'd always communicate first before making any decision to remove anyone from the bank.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. I mean, we prefer it if people can pick up a shift, you know, 1 every 6 months. We would normally give 12 months before we'd even start looking at removing anyone from the bank. But as Hayley has alluded, it's more beneficial if you can pick up regular shifts. But my team do keep quite a close eye on it, and we will reach out to you if we've noticed you haven't booked a shift for a while, just to find out if your circumstances have changed, if there's anything we can help you with. So we do keep quite a close eye on it anyway.
Okay, so we've got a couple of questions about PWPs. So an attendee asked, can someone please discuss registration of PWP after being out of profession for some time? Then, sorry.
No, you're fine. Yeah.
So then the next question is, what is the hourly rate for PWPs? Clarification would be useful on what to expect with the delivery. Is it based within the hour? Is it based on seeing one treatment patient and the rest admin supervision, or 2 treatment patients, etc.?
So again, this will be driven by the service. So I think first question in terms of if you're out of practice and want to get back into practice and looking at kind of how you register, you can register as a PWP with the BA, BCP or the BPS. Both of those, if you go onto their websites, will give you exact information as the process to follow. So I would advise that individual or individuals to go to the BPS or BA, BCP website and have a look. In terms of the hourly rate, I can't remember exactly off the top of my head. I would be kind of making this up. I believe a top of a band 5, kind of with everything added in, was around about £25 something, but that included kind of overheads, etc., and things as well. So I don't know the exact amount per hour for the PWPs and high intensities, but we can certainly, when we're looking at kind of registration, go through that in more detail with individuals. Final question was, remind me, Vanessa.
They talk about the expectation of delivery within the hour. Is it based on seeing 1 treatment patient and the rest of admin, or 2 treatment patients?
So it's in line with exactly what we would recommend in the manual and what that service requires and how that service works. So for instance, in the services I worked in, a high intensity treatment appointment, if they weren't doing something like reliving work, was 50 minutes, and they had then 15 to 20 minutes of admin. So that's how their day would go. They would do a 50-minute treatment and then they would have 15 to 20 minutes of admin. For a PWP, we would do 25-minute treatment sessions and they would have 15 minutes of admin after that. Assessments would be 45 minutes in length and they would have a half an hour admin slot after those assessments. So everything will depend on the service that you are working within. It's not something that we as a bank are going to specify. It will be guided by how that service works and what that service kind of wants you to do and how you want to work as well, because everybody's different. I previously worked with individuals who wanted to back their clinical work and then have, say, an afternoon of administrative catch up on notes. There were other people, and when I was a clinician, I wanted to do my clinical session and then I wanted to write my notes afterwards. So there is going to be kind of obviously that flexibility with the service for you to discuss with them how you work and how they want you to work.
That's great. And then this is really like the second to last question now. We're actually over time. Can we apply while still going through re-registration, going through registration?
No, so you have to have finished your qualification and have got that qualification in whatever modality it is, and you have to be registered or accredited with the relevant professional body. Once you have those things, you can then register with the bank.
Great. Okay, and lastly, someone's asked, when does it go live? When can they join and see the shifts?
It's already live. So we are already, as we say, interviewing individuals, PWPs and high intensity therapists, and getting them on board with the bank. At the moment, we are working with Mersey Care, Christina and her team, on kind of piloting that and getting people kind of into placements. We're yet to kind of get somebody into their first placement, but we're very, very nearly there. And what we will do is, as services come on board and sign up with us, and as practitioners come on board and sign up with us, we will start to gradually kind of increase the pace in which that works. I don't know, Sam, you've come off mute, so I'm thinking you probably want to set
Yeah, I
some
would say,
expectations.
yeah, absolutely. I think if there's any services that are interested in registering for the bank, then or signing up to services that the bank providing, then absolutely get in touch. I think for some of the reasons Hayley mentioned earlier, I think we just need to err on the side of caution in terms of when we say about big bang, because obviously we need to just ensure there's a bit of system build and setup and contracts and all that sort of implementation piece that needs to be covered off before we can just go live. But by all means, if you're interested, then absolutely get in touch, and we can start to build up what that pipeline looks like and make sure that you as a service are within that, and set those expectations as we understand how many are within that pipeline as well. But absolutely, in order for this to be the success that we hope and want it to be, the more services that are signed up, obviously, the better. We can support more with face-to-face stuff when there's more services signed up, because again, geographically, there'll be more workers that can support perhaps Christina's service remotely. They might be able to support yours locally if they're local to your service, and vice versa. So, yeah, the more the merrier.